Her ex had laughed when he walked away, shaking his head like her loneliness was some kind of joke. He never imagined that the same quiet girl he mocked for being too much and too strange would one day stand beside the strongest vampire king the world had ever known. Rain had followed Elena all afternoon, like the sky itself felt sorry for her. She walked through the almost empty city street, her coat pulled tight, the sound of her ex's mocking words still echoing in her head. "Of course you're single," he had said, laughing in front of his friends. "Who would choose a girl who believes in monsters and fairy tales?" Their laughter had been the last thing she heard before the cafe door shut behind her before she forced herself not to cry in front of everyone. Now the streetlights flickered on, washing the wet pavement in a soft, golden blur. Cars rushed past, but she felt strangely alone, like the world had narrowed to just her footsteps and the rhythmic tapping of rain on her umbrella. Her phone vibrated once, a message from a friend. "You okay?" She typed, "I'm fine," then erased it. She wasn't fine. Not because she'd been dumped, she knew he was wrong for her, but because his words had touched the oldest wound she carried. The fear that maybe she really was too odd, too soft, too dreamy for this world. She stopped at a crosswalk, the red light reflecting in a puddle at her feet. For a moment she stared at her own reflection in the water, tired eyes, damp hair, a face that tried to be strong and kind at the same time. "I'm not broken," she whispered to herself, though no one was around to hear. "I'm just not what you wanted." The wind picked up, cold and sharp, pushing her hair back from her face as if the night itself was trying to look at her more clearly. High above the city, where the rain met the stone towers of an old, forgotten castle hidden in the mountains beyond the skyline, someone else was watching her. He stood on a balcony built before the world had electricity, his dark cloak stirring in the wind, his eyes a deep, impossible shade of crimson that held centuries of memory. To the world he was a myth, a shadow, a whispered warning passed down in old stories, the vampire king, ruler of the night asterisk. To himself he was something worse, eternal, exhausted, and very, very tired of watching humans hurt one another. His name was Kael. He felt her pain before he truly saw her. It came to him like a faint ripple in a still lake, an ache of humiliation, of loneliness, of someone trying to hold themselves together with nothing but stubborn hope. Kael had learned long ago to shield himself from the noise of human emotions, but this one slipped through his guard. It was small but honest, not poisoned by cruelty or greed, just tender, wounded, real. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he was back in another century, hearing the same cruel laughter, watching another gentle-hearted girl being mocked for her kindness. He had not been able to save that one. The weight of that failure still sat on his undead chest like a stone. His fingers curled around the old stone railing as if gripping the past itself. "Not again," he muttered, though no one stood beside him to hear. "I will not watch this again." When he opened his eyes and reached out with his senses, carefully like someone touching a fragile thread, he found her. Elena, standing at the crosswalk, shoulders tense, tears threatening but not falling. There was something different about her, something that drew him like a warm light in a house on a winter night. Most humans he had known were loud in their desires, their fears screaming across the dark like sirens. She was quiet, but the quiet was not emptiness. It was a choice. She chose, over and over, to be gentle in a world that mistook gentleness for weakness. He studied her from his distant height, the way her hand trembled just slightly when she wiped at the corner of her eye, pretending it was just the rain. He heard the words she didn't dare say aloud. "Maybe I'm hard to love. Maybe I'm meant to be alone." The thought pierced him more sharply than sunlight ever could. "Your ex is a fool," Kael said softly, his voice disappearing into the wind. His kind had always been careful not to interfere with human lives more than necessary, a vow, an old law born from centuries of mistakes. But tonight, with the storm rolling in and that girl standing under the weak glow of a street lamp, something inside him shifted. It wasn't hunger that called him. It wasn't loneliness, though he had centuries of it inside him. It was something far more dangerous for a creature like him, the urge to protect someone he had never met. Elena crossed the street as the light turned green, not noticing the way the air grew just a little colder, the way the shadows along the buildings seemed to lean in and listen. Her boots splashed through shallow puddles, water soaking her jeans. She thought of going home, of burying herself in blankets and pretending none of this had happened, but instead she turned toward the park at the edge of the city. She didn't know why, Maybe she needed trees instead of walls, the soft rustle of leaves instead of the harsh chatter of people. The park was nearly empty, the playground still, the swings moving just slightly in the wind as if invisible children were playing. The lamps here were older, their light dimmer and gentler. She sat on a bench beneath a bare tree, her umbrella closed at her side, letting the light drizzle touch her face. She looked up at the sky, at the heavy clouds, and said quietly, "If there's anyone out there, anyone who understands what it feels like to love too deeply and be laughed at for it, please just let me not give up on myself." Kael felt her words like a hand, knocking lightly on the door of his heart. He exhaled a slow, unnecessary breath. It had been a long time since any prayer, human or otherwise, reached him so clearly. He could turn away, wrap himself in the safety of his palace of shadows and stone. He could convince himself she was just another human in another city whose story would begin and end without him. He could obey the laws of his kind. Or he could answer. The wind shifted. The rain softened to a mist, clinging to the air like a promise. Elena shivered and rubbed her hands together, unaware that the night around her was changing, unaware that something ancient had just made a decision about her life. Far above, Kael stepped back from the balcony, his eyes still fixed on that distant park, on that small, stubborn glow of a human soul that refused to harden. His voice was low but steady as he spoke to the empty throne room behind him, to the portraits of kings and queens long turned to dust. "For the first time in a century," he said, "I will break our law." The torches in the old hall flickered as if in protest, ancient magic stirring. A tension, subtle yet powerful, stretched through the night between his world and hers. Kael's jaw tightened, but there was something almost like a smile at the edge of his lips, quiet, sad, and hopeful in a way he had not allowed himself to be for a very long time. He took one step forward, and in that step, the fate of a heartbroken human girl and the strongest vampire king began to intertwine. In the park, Elena suddenly felt it, a presence cold yet strangely comforting, like the first breath of air after crying for too long. The hairs on her arms stood up. The street lamps around her flickered once, then steadied. She swallowed, glancing around, her heartbeat picking up for reasons she couldn't name. "Hello," she whispered into the almost empty darkness, feeling foolish and yet unable to stay silent. "Is someone there?" From the deepest shadow between the trees, just beyond the edge of her sight, a tall figure began to step forward, the outline of a long coat, the glint of eyes that were not quite human and yet filled with a sorrow she recognized. Before she could see his face, before she could understand who, or what, was answering the quiet prayer she had just spoken to the sky, the wind rose again, carrying his first word to her like a secret. "Elena." And in that trembling instant, her world started to change, though she had no idea yet that the one stepping out of the shadows was a king, or that the laughter of one cruel ex would soon mean nothing compared to the power of the bond that was about to begin. Her name hanging in the air did not sound like it did when her ex said it, sharp, impatient, half a sigh. This time it was soft, careful, almost reverent, as if each syllable mattered. Elena froze on the bench, every muscle in her body going still. The wind whispered through the trees, the swings creaked faintly, and yet everything felt suddenly too quiet, too focused, like the entire park was holding its breath with her. She turned her head slowly toward the shadows where the voice had come from. For a moment, she saw nothing but darkness and the faint outline of tree trunks. Then, as her eyes adjusted, a figure separated from the night itself, as if the shadows had decided to take the shape of a man. He was tall, his long coat moving gently with the wind, dark hair falling just past his jaw, and eyes that caught the lamplight in an unnatural way, too bright, too deep, like rubies drowning in ink. Her heart jumped painfully against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to stand up and walk away, but another, quieter feeling kept her rooted to the bench. He didn't feel dangerous. Not in the way she'd always imagined danger. There was something heavy about him, yes, something powerful and old, but there was no mockery in his gaze, no hunger for cruelty. If anything, there was a strange, almost unbearable sadness. "You said my name," she managed, her voice coming out smaller than she wanted. Do I know you?" Kael stopped a few steps away from her, keeping a respectful distance. Up close, the scent of rain seemed to cling to him, mixed with something faintly metallic, like old coins or iron gates. His pale skin made the darkness of his hair and eyes even more intense. He glanced briefly at the empty park around them, then back at her with a focus that made her feel seen in a way that was both unsettling and oddly comforting. "No," he said quietly, his tone smooth, low, and patient. "You do not know me, but I know you, Elena." Her fingers tightened around the handle of her closed umbrella. Every horror movie she'd ever seen flashed through her mind, and yet he didn't move closer. He didn't loom. He just stood there, hands relaxed at his sides, almost as if he were the one afraid of scaring her asterisk. "How?" she asked, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Are you following me?" The thought should have terrified her, but curiosity and a strange, inexplicable trust were wrestling with her fear. Kael considered his words carefully. For centuries, he had learned to hide what he was, to blend into rumor and legend. But this girl had just asked the sky for someone who understood her heart, and he had answered. He felt, for the first time in a long time, that lies would be a kind of cruelty. "I heard your prayer," he said at last, "and I recognize something in it, something I have not heard in a very long time." Elena stared at him, confusion softening the edges of her fear. "My prayer?" She let out a shaky laugh. "That wasn't really a prayer, I was just talking to myself. I do that sometimes when I feel stupid." He shook his head, and there was the faintest hint of a sad smile on his lips. It was a prayer, not to a god, perhaps, but to anyone who might listen. People don't realize how much power there is in that kind of honesty. The way he said it made her want to believe him. She noticed the way his eyes never wandered to her body the way some men's did. They stayed on her face, on her expression, reading it like a book he cared about. It made her cheeks flush with a strange mixture of embarrassment and gratitude. "Who asterisk are you?" she asked, the question coming out almost as a whisper. He hesitated. There were endless names he had worn over the centuries: monster, lord, nightmare, savior, curse. Finally, he chose the simplest truth. "My name is Kael," he said. "I come from very far away, farther than these streets, farther than this century would understand." He saw the confusion flare in her eyes, so he added gently, "I am not here to harm you. I am here because I heard someone who is still kind even after being hurt, and that is rare enough to follow." Her chest tightened. Those words slid straight into the empty spaces her ex's insults had left. "You don't even know me," she said, but her voice trembled. "You don't know what I've done or how I think or—" "I know you didn't laugh when you saw the old woman drop her groceries last week," he said softly. "You picked them up and you missed your bus. I know you stayed up 3 nights helping your friend study, even though you were exhausted. I know you apologize when you're the one who gets hurt. And I know you walked out of somewhere today where someone enjoyed making you feel small, and you still whispered to the sky to help you not give up on yourself." Elena's breath caught. Her mind raced back through the week, through small, forgettable moments she never imagined anyone else had noticed. The fact that he did, this stranger with impossible eyes, made her feel exposed, but also strangely less alone. "How can you possibly know that?" she asked, the question halfway between awe and fear. Kael lowered his gaze for a moment, as if ashamed of the answer. When he spoke, his voice was softer, quieter. "Because I have been watching humans for a very long time, longer than you would believe. Your city, your lives, your brief spark of existence, I see more than I should." He paused, then added more carefully, "And sometimes, when someone glows a little brighter in the dark, I notice." Her brain latched onto his words. Very long time, longer than you would believe. There was no way he was older than 35, maybe 37, yet he spoke like a history book and a poem at the same time. "You talk like you're ancient," she said, trying to force a joking tone into her voice even as unease crept under her skin. "What are you, some kind of immortal philosopher hiding in city parks?" He looked at her then, really looked, and something shifted in his eyes. He could have lied, told her he was just a strange, poetic man. But the night had carried her fragile hope all the way to him, and he was tired of being a ghost in people's lives. "You would not believe me," he warned softly. Her lips pulled into a small, stubborn line. "Try me." The wind rustled the branches overhead. A car passed in the distance, its headlights briefly cutting through the trees before disappearing again. For a heartbeat, there was only the two of them and the sound of their breathing, hers quick, his unnaturally calm. "I am not human, Elena," Kael said finally. "Not anymore. I have not been for a very long time." His voice did not dramatize the words. It was too heavy, too resigned for that. "Where I come from, they call me a king. Here, if they knew I existed, they would call me a monster." Her first instinct was to laugh it off, to accuse him of playing some weird, elaborate joke, but something in his eyes made the laughter die before it could reach her lips. There was no performance there, no smugness, none of the self-satisfaction of someone trying to scare her for fun. There was only ancient regret and a loneliness that felt as deep as the night itself. "A king," she repeated faintly. "Of what exactly?" His answer came so quietly she almost missed it. "Of those you were mocked for believing in." The swings creaked again as if pushed by an invisible hand. The light above them flickered briefly, casting his face in a shifting pattern of shadow and glow. His features were too perfect in a way that felt wrong for a human. Every angle refined, every line of his jaw and cheek precise, his eyes too steady, too aware. She swallowed, her pulse drumming in her ears. "Vampires aren't real," she said, though the words lacked conviction. "I once thought humans would never conquer the sky," he replied gently. "Yet here you are, flying in metal birds and catching starlight in your screens." He tilted his head slightly. "Just because something lives in the shadows does not mean it is not real." She could feel logic slipping from her hands like wet sand. There was no reasonable explanation for how he knew those details about her week, or why the air around him felt charged, different, like the space near a thunderstorm. And yet everything about him, even his confession, carried no hint of threat, only the desire to reassure her. "Okay," she said slowly, her voice trembling. "Let's say I believe you. Let's say you're what you just said. Why are you here in my park talking to me? Out of everyone in this city, out of everyone you could notice, why me?" Kael took a careful step closer, still leaving enough distance that she could stand and walk away if she chose. His gaze softened, and when he spoke, there was something like admiration in his tone. "Because you are exactly what my world needs," he said. "Someone who believes in monsters and still chooses kindness. Someone who has been laughed at and still refuses to become cruel. You were mocked for your heart today, Elena. Where I come from, that heart would be worth more than all the crowns I've ever worn." Her throat tightened so sharply she had to squeeze her eyes shut for a second. His words slid into the place her ex had carved open, not filling it completely, but warming it in a way that hurt and healed at the same time. No one had ever spoken about her like that. Not as too emotional, too sensitive, too intense, but as if those things made her valuable asterisk. "That's a beautiful lie," she said quietly, "but it still sounds like a lie." "It isn't," he replied, his voice as steady as stone. "And I can prove it if you let me." The air between them seemed to thicken. She opened her eyes again, meeting his gaze. Somewhere in the back of her mind, common sense was waving a red flag, but something older, some instinct she couldn't name, leaned forward instead of pulling back. "How?" she asked. "How could you possibly prove any of this?" Kael lifted one hand very slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal. He didn't reach for her, didn't touch her. Instead, he extended his palm upward, fingers slightly curved, and looked at the nearest street lamp. The bulb had been buzzing faintly all evening, flickering in a tired rhythm. "Watch," he murmured. For a brief second, nothing happened. Then the light above them dimmed, as if someone had turned an invisible dial. The glow shrank and surged, flickering in time with the subtle movements of his fingers. When he closed his hand gently, the light went completely out, plunging the park bench into a soft, deep darkness broken only by distant city glow. Elena gasped, her hand flying to her chest. She looked instinctively up at the lamp. No shattered glass, no sound, just darkness. Then Kael slowly opened his fingers. The bulb flared back to life, brighter than before, bathing them in warm, golden light once more. The wind stilled. The swings stopped moving. Elena stared at his hand like it held the answer to every myth she'd ever read. Her rational mind scrambled for explanations, faulty wiring, coincidence, some sort of remote device, but none of them fit what she had just felt. A strange pressure in the air, a tug at the edges of her thoughts when the light obeyed him. Her breathing grew shallow. Her world, so ordinary just an hour ago, suddenly felt far too big. You did that, she whispered, didn't you? Kael's gaze never left her face. He lowered his hand, slowly, respectfully, as if putting away a dangerous weapon. Yes, he said. A small thing, a harmless thing, to show you that the impossible is closer than you think. For a long moment, Elena said nothing. Her mind flickered between fear and awe, between the memory of being laughed at for believing in monsters and the reality of standing in front of one who spoke to her with more gentleness than most humans she knew. Finally, she found her voice, though it was barely there. "What do you want from me, Kael?" she asked. "Really?" He held her gaze with a kind of solemn honesty that made it hard to look away. "I want to offer you a choice," he said. "A choice I have not offered anyone in 100 years. To stay in the life you know, where people like your ex decide your worth, or to step into a world where your heart, your courage, and your kindness might change more than just your own story." Her mouth went dry. "What kind of world?" she managed. For the first time, a flicker of something like hope touched his expression. "My world," he answered. "The one hidden in the shadows of yours, a world of night, of secrets, and of a throne that has been waiting for someone who still believes in goodness, even in the dark." The rain had stopped completely now. The park felt suspended, caught between two breaths. Elena's thoughts spun, colliding with every fairy tale she'd ever clung to in secret and every scar reality had given her. She looked at the man, or whatever he truly was, standing in front of her. The strongest vampire king, if his words were true. A creature of night who had come not to pray, but to offer her a kind of impossible respect. Her heart pounded so loudly she could almost hear it. "You're asking me," she said slowly, each word trembling, "to walk away from everything I know because you think my heart matters to your world." Kael nodded once, and in his eyes she saw no manipulation, no rushing, only a quiet patience that somehow hurt more than pressure ever could. "I am asking you," he said softly, "if you are willing to discover that the things you were mocked for might be the very things that make you extraordinary." Elena's hand, resting on the bench beside her, curled into a fist. The echo of her ex's laughter rose in her memory, and then slowly was drowned out by the memory of Kael's words. "That heart would be worth more than all the crowns I've ever worn." She inhaled shakily, the night closing in, the world expanding, standing on the edge between the ordinary and the impossible. Her lips parted, ready to answer. And just as the first word formed on her tongue, a sharp, distant scream tore through the park from the direction of the main path. Raw, terrified, unmistakably human. Elena jolted to her feet, heart leaping into her throat. She turned toward the sound. "Did you hear?" But when she spun back to Kael, his eyes were no longer only gentle. They were suddenly, terrifyingly, fiercely alert, glowing with a deeper red from within, like embers suddenly fed new air. "Elena," he said, his voice now edged with a power she had not yet heard, "stay behind me." And in that instant, with a stranger's fear slicing through the night and the vampire king stepping forward like a shield between her and the unseen danger, Elena realized that her choice wouldn't wait for a quiet, safe moment. The world of monsters she had always believed in was no longer a distant story. It was here, and it was calling her name. Rainwater still glistened on the path where the scream had come from, shining like tiny mirrors under the trembling lamps. Elena's whole body went cold, but her feet moved anyway, one step forward before she even realized. Kael's arm rose at once, not touching her, but forming an invisible barrier. "I said behind me," he murmured, his voice low but firm. It wasn't a command filled with ego. It was something else. Old habit, old instinct, like someone who had led people into danger too many times and learned what it cost to be careless. His posture shifted. Shoulders squared, head lifted slightly, every line of him suddenly sharper, more dangerous. For the first time, Elena understood that the sadness in his eyes did not cancel out what he was. "Someone's in trouble," she whispered, her breath clouding in the chill air. "We can't just stand here." "We won't," Kael answered, "but you have to let me go first." Before she could protest, he was already moving. Not running, not in any human way, One instant he was beside her, the next he seemed to blur, the world bending around him as he crossed the distance with impossible speed. The wind from his movement brushed past her, filled with a strange, metallic coolness that made her skin prickle. "Elena, stay in the light," he called back, his voice echoing slightly as if the night itself carried it. She wanted to obey, she truly did, but the scream came again, closer, desperate, choked with panic, and something inside her refused to just wait. Her whole life she had been told she was too soft, too sensitive, too willing to care about other people's problems. Tonight, that softness burned like a small, defiant fire. She stepped out of the warm circle of the bench's street lamp and followed, her boots thudding softly on the wet path. The main walkway curved past tall, bare trees, their branches like clawed fingers against the cloudy sky. As she moved, the smell of damp earth and wet leaves filled her nose, blending with a faint, unfamiliar scent that made the hair on her arms stand up, a cold, metallic sweetness that she instinctively disliked. Ahead, under another lamp, Elena saw them. A young man in a hoodie, back pressed against a lamppost, eyes wide with terror and someone asterisk looming over him. The attacker looked human at first glance, but even from a distance, Elena could see the wrongness. The way his shoulders were too tense, the angle of his head too predatory, his mouth too close to the terrified boy's throat. Kael was there already, a dark blur that resolved into solid form right between them. His hand shot out, fingers closing around the attacker's wrist with a speed and precision that made Elena's breath stop. His expression was different now, no longer gentle, no longer just sad. This was a king. "That's enough," Kael said, the words quiet but packed with command. The attacker actually hissed, turning toward him. His eyes glowed a dull, feral red, nothing like Kael's deep, controlled gaze. His lips peeled back, revealing teeth that were just a little too sharp, a little too long. "Stay out of this, old one," the creature snarled. "You abandoned our kind long ago." The hoodie-clad boy whimpered, trying to slide away along the lamppost, his hands shaking. Elena's heart clenched. Every instinct screamed to run to him, to put herself between him and danger, even though she knew she was no match for whatever this thing was. Kael's grip tightened. "You are hunting in my city," he replied, his tone almost soft, but that softness vibrated with something terrifying. "You did not think that would go unnoticed forever, did you?" The attacker twisted, trying to yank free, but it was like watching a moth struggle against iron. Kael didn't even seem to exert effort. Still, the other vampire, inevitably that was the word now, laughed, though the sound was brittle. "Your city, you sit in your ruins and pretend to be a ghost," he spat. "The humans don't even know your name anymore, but they will know ours. They will know what to fear." Elena inched closer along the path, staying partially hidden behind a tree. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought they must hear it. Fear clawed at her throat, but she couldn't look away. Kael stood so still, so controlled, and yet she could feel the storm inside him. "You shame our kind," Kael said softly, and for a second Elena heard not anger but sorrow. "We feed to live, we do not terrorize to feel powerful." "Power is all that matters," the feral vampire snarled, then suddenly jerked his free hand up, fingers curling toward the boy on the ground. The air around the terrified human shimmered faintly. The boy gasped, choking, as if invisible fingers were tightening around his throat. "No," Elena cried before she could stop herself. Kael's head snapped slightly toward her voice, just for a heartbeat. In that fraction of a second, the attacker twisted viciously, using the distraction to wrench his wrist halfway free. Something in his shoulder cracked. He howled in pain but tore himself loose enough to lunge. Not at Kael. At Elena's. He moved with terrifying speed, his body a dark streak across the path. Elena barely had time to gasp. One moment she was clinging to the tree trunk, the next there were cold hands reaching for her, eyes wild, fangs bared. But there was someone faster. Kael moved like lightning given shape. One instant he was by the lamppost, the next he was between her and the oncoming monster, one arm snapping out like a barrier of stone. The attacker collided with him hard enough to send a shock through the ground. Elena stumbled back, catching herself on the tree. Don't, Kael said, and this time the word wasn't just sound, it was power. The air rippled. For a moment everything went silent as if the night itself stopped to listen. The other vampire froze mid-lunge, muscles straining against an invisible force. His eyes bulged with rage and something like fear. "You are still bound," the feral one choked out. Kael's jaw clenched, by choice. With a subtle motion of his fingers, he flung the attacker backward, not slamming him into a tree, not breaking bone on purpose, but sending him skidding across the wet ground, far from Elena, far from the boy who was now coughing, clutching his throat and sucking in air like it was the most precious thing in the world. Elena's legs trembled. She gripped the tree so hard her knuckles ached. She had never felt so small and so utterly exposed in her life. And yet under all the fear something flickered. Awe, this was real, all of it. The monsters, the power, the king who stood between them. The other vampire scrambled to his feet, eyes burning. "You've gone soft, Kael," he spat the name like poison. "Living among them, protecting them, you've forgotten what we are." Kael took one slow step forward, his coat whispering against the damp leaves. "No," he said quietly. "I remember exactly what we are. That is why I do not allow this." He lifted one hand, fingers splayed. The lamplight seemed to bend toward his palm for a heartbeat, shadows thickening around his feet. The attacker flinched, snarling. "You wouldn't dare," the feral vampire hissed. "Not with her watching." Kael's eyes glanced just once toward Elena. She met his gaze, breath shaking, mind racing. She didn't know what he was capable of. She didn't know what he was about to do. But in that moment she understood something. He was giving her a choice. He could end this quickly, brutally, in the dark where she wouldn't understand. Or he could hold back for her, for the kindness she carried like a stubborn light. "Please don't hurt him," she blurted, her own voice startling her. "I mean, he's dangerous, I know, but if there's another way." The attacker stared at her like she was insane. Kael's eyes softened for half a heartbeat, then deepened again with resolve. "You hear that?" Kael said to the other vampire. "The human you tried to harm is begging me to spare you. These are the ones you call weak." The feral vampire's lip curled. "You think her softness is strength?" he sneered. "You really have lost your mind." "No," Kael replied, and there was a quiet, immovable certainty in his tone. "I have finally found it again." He lowered his hand. The air relaxed, the heavy pressure fading. For an instant, the attacker's face shifted, from rage to confusion. Then Kael continued, his voice as calm as if they were discussing weather. "You will leave this city tonight," he said. "You will tell the others who creep in its shadows that this territory is claimed. No hunting for sport, no playing with fear if you refuse." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The silence that followed said everything. The other vampire snarled, shoulders heaving, but underneath the anger, Elena saw it now. Fear. Not of humans, of him, of Kael, the king who had left and yet whose shadow still weighed more than any throne. "This isn't over," the attacker spat, backing away. "You can't protect them all, not forever, not even her." His gaze flicked to Elena, sharp and hostile. A chill ran down her spine, but she lifted her chin, refusing to drop her eyes. Maybe it was foolish, but after what she had just seen, shrinking would have felt worse than fear. Kael stepped subtly in front of her again, blocking that gaze with his own. "Go," he said. The feral vampire vanished into the trees, not as cleanly as Kael had moved, but fast enough to be unnerving. Branches rustled, then stilled, leaving behind only the gentle patter of distant rain and the harsh breathing of the human boy on the ground. For a long moment, no one spoke. Elena released the tree and stumbled forward, knees weak. She hurried to the boy, dropping to a crouch beside him. Hey, it's okay," she said, her voice soft but steadier than she felt. "You're all right, you're safe." His eyes were wide, his pupils huge. What was that? Did you see?" "She's right," Kael's voice came, closer now, but softer again, gentler. The storm inside him had stepped back, allowing the man she had first met beneath the tree to return. "You are safe. You need to go home. Forget this place tonight." Elena glanced up at him. "He can't just forget asterisk." But then she saw what Kael was doing. He wasn't staring menacingly. He wasn't looming. He was kneeling, meeting the boy's eye line, his voice low and soothing in a way that reminded her of someone calming a child after a nightmare. "You remember feeling afraid," Kael said quietly to the boy, his tone like a lullaby. "But you won't remember why. You'll think it was just shadows and stress. You'll go home, you'll sleep, you'll wake up tomorrow and still be you." The boy blinked slowly, his gaze growing unfocused for a second. His breath evened out. "Shadows," he murmured weakly. I think I just freaked myself out. Sorry." Elena's heart squeezed at the apology. "Don't be sorry," she told him softly. "Just go home, please." He nodded, clumsily pushing himself to his feet. "Thank you," he said to both of them without really processing who they were, then stumbled down the path, glancing back only once with uncertain confusion before hurrying out of the park. Silence settled again. Elena rose slowly, her legs still shaking. Kael remained kneeling for another moment, watching the boy leave, his expression a mix of relief and something like guilt. When he finally stood, he looked older, not in his features, which stayed the same, but in the weight he carried. "You didn't have to let him go," Elena said quietly, meaning the attacker, not the human boy. "You could have stopped him permanently." Kael turned to her, the lamplight catching the faint lines of tiredness near his eyes. "I have lived long enough to know that ending a life is easy," he said. "Living with the echo of that choice is not. He may force my hand one day, but tonight your voice reminded me that mercy is not weakness." Elena swallowed. The night around them felt different now, not just mysterious, but thick with decisions, with past and future pressing in. "You really are a king, aren't you?" she murmured. His lips twitched with a sad ghost of a smile. "Of ruins and shadows," he said. "A king of a people who fear me, a world that has tried to move on without me. It is not as glamorous as the stories suggest." She studied him for a long, quiet moment. The man who had stepped out of the dark to answer a stranger's whispered plea. The creature who could move faster than thought and bend light, who had been tempted to crush an enemy but stopped because she asked him not to. The lonely king who watched humans from stone towers and still believed their kindness meant something. "You protected him," she said. "A human you don't know, you didn't have to do that either." He exhaled softly. His gaze drifted briefly to the sky as if he could see beyond the clouds, beyond the city glow. "Once," he said slowly, "a girl not unlike you was hurt in front of me, gentle, mocked for her softness. I hesitated. I obeyed our law of non-interference. She died because I chose distance over action." The pain in his voice was quiet but sharp. It wasn't dramatic. It was worn, like something he had carried alone for centuries. "I told myself I was being wise," he continued, "that I was respecting the boundaries between our worlds, but wisdom without compassion is just another kind of cruelty. I swore that day that if I ever saw that kind of heart in danger again, I would not look away." Elena's throat tightened. "You failed once," she said gently, "and you've been punishing yourself ever since." He blinked, surprised by her bluntness. Then slowly he gave a small nod. "Something like that." She breathed in the damp, cold air, letting it fill her lungs. This was all too much, too big, too strange, too far from the life she had known just that afternoon. And yet, standing here with him, she didn't feel like she was drowning. She felt chosen. "The offer you made me," she said, her voice steadier now, "wasn't just some dramatic gesture, was it?" Kael shook his head. "No, my realm, our hidden cities, our courts, they are unstable. Power struggles, old grudges. Many of my kind believe mercy makes us weak. Others are tired of hiding and want to rule openly, no matter the cost. I left the throne to avoid another war, hoping they would learn balance on their own." His eyes grew dark with memory. "They did not." She remembered the attacker's words. "You abandoned our kind long ago." She remembered the way he had said, "Our city is claimed." "You want to go back," she said quietly. "You just don't want to go back alone." "For centuries I ruled with strength," Kael admitted. "I know how to inspire fear, I know how to command armies, but I did not know how to value the quiet things, the small kindnesses, the soft voices. I thought they were unimportant." He looked at her, really looked, as if seeing something sacred. I need someone who knows what I do not, someone who understands hearts better than crowns. She laughed breathlessly, not because it was funny, but because her mind struggled to hold the weight of his words. You think asterisk understand hearts? She asked. I just got laughed at and dumped by someone who thought mine was a joke. And still, Kael said, his voice almost reverent, you saw a boy in danger and stepped closer instead of running. You begged mercy for a creature who wanted to harm you. You pray not to be less soft, but not to give up on yourself. He shook his head slowly, almost in disbelief. You are what my world has always needed and never valued. Elena looked down at her hands, the same hands that had shaken picking up an old woman's groceries, that had trembled sending that last text to her ex, that had clung to the tree just now in terror. Hands that had always felt small. Your world sounds terrifying, she said honestly, and lonely and dangerous. It is all of those, Kael agreed softly. But it can also be beautiful. Our cities are built under mountains carved with starlight. Our libraries hold histories humans have forgotten. There are those among my kind who are tired of blood and fear, who want a different way but don't know how to imagine it. He paused, then added, with you there, I believe they could. I'm just one person. The words came out reflexively, almost defensive. So am I, he replied simply, and yet they still remember my name. Silence settled between them again, but it was different now, full, not empty. The park around them seemed to fade, the sounds of distant cars and dripping branches blurring into a soft background hum. The choice lingered between them like a delicate thread. If I go with you, Elena said slowly, tasting each word, what happens to my life here, my friends, my work, my everything? He did not rush to reassure her. He did not promise it would be easy. You will not vanish, he said. We move between worlds more often than humans know. You could come back sometimes, visit, call. Your life here would not be erased, it would be expanded. But you would change. You would see things you can't unsee. You would share a bond with our realm that few humans have ever had. She thought of her tiny apartment, the plant on her windowsill that always drooped, the job that paid the bills but slowly drained her, the friends who loved her but sometimes didn't understand why she felt everything so deeply. She thought of her ex's laugh, sharp and cruel, and the way she had swallowed her tears just to keep the peace. Then she thought of the boy whose life had just brushed past death without him even understanding, the feral vampire's eyes, the way Kael had stepped in front of her without hesitation. What would I be there? She asked softly. A guest, a pet human, a symbol. His expression went very still. No, he said quietly, you would be my equal, my counsel, if you chose it, my queen. The word hung between them like a bell tone, deep and clear. It didn't sound like a fairy tale fantasy on his tongue. It sounded like a responsibility, a partnership, a vow. Elena's heart raced. Queen. The girl whose ex had laughed at her for being too much was standing in a park with an immortal king offering her a throne in a world of shadows. It was ridiculous. It was impossible. It was real. Why me? She whispered, her voice breaking. There must be thousands of women who are stronger, braver, more. Stop, Kael said gently, but there was a firmness in it that made her obey. Strength is not always loud. Courage is not always dramatic. You have lost, and yet you still choose hope. You have been mocked, and yet you still choose softness. That is a path I do not know how to walk alone. His gaze searched her face, every line, every scar. I do not want a queen who has never been hurt. I want a queen who knows what it costs to stay kind. Tears blurred her vision. She hadn't planned to cry tonight, but everything in her life seemed to have cracked open in a few hours. She wiped at her eyes with the heel of her hand, embarrassed, but Kael didn't look away. He watched her cry like it was not a weakness to hide, but a truth to honor. This is crazy, she murmured, half laughing through the tears. Yes, he agreed softly. It is. But so is pretending you were born only for ordinary pain and small humiliations. A memory rose in her mind, her ex's voice, dismissive and amused. Who would choose a girl who believes in monsters and fairy tales? She thought of that now, standing beside a vampire king under a trembling street lamp. Maybe, she said slowly. I believed in monsters and fairy tales because some part of me always knew the world was bigger than what I could see. Kael's eyes softened. Then let me show you, he said. He extended his hand toward her. Not like a demand, not like someone claiming a prize, but like an invitation. His fingers were long, pale, steady. The air around them felt cooler, sharper, like standing at the edge of a cliff and smelling snow on far-off mountains. Elena looked at his hand, looked at the path back to the city, looked at the bench where she'd sat alone, replaying her ex's laughter, looked at the shadows where she'd first heard her name spoken with care. Everything in her life had told her she was too much or not enough. Too sensitive, too strange, too dreamy, too emotional, and here was someone, something, who looked at all those same pieces and called them precious, powerful, needed. "Will it hurt?" she asked quietly. "Sometimes," Kael answered honestly, "but you will not hurt alone, not ever again." There it was, the truth. No promises of a perfect life, just the promise of being seen, of being partnered, of being valued for everything she had tried to hide. Her heart beat once, twice, 3 times. Elena took a slow, deep breath. Then she stepped forward and placed her hand in his. His skin was cool but not dead. There was a quiet strength there, like marble warmed by candlelight. As their fingers intertwined, the air around them seemed to shift, deepening, humming with a low, thrumming energy that she felt all the way up her arm. Kael's eyes closed for a brief moment, as if he were sealing something sacred. When he opened them again, they were still that deep, impossible red, but softer now, like wine instead of blood. "Very well," he whispered, more to the night than to her. "It begins." The ground trembled just slightly, as if some distant, buried door had turned on ancient hinges. The shadows around their feet darkened, but not in a way that felt threatening. It felt like the world pulling back a curtain. Elena gasped, not in fear this time, but in wonder. The path beneath them shimmered. For a heartbeat, she could see 2 versions of the park at once, the familiar one with its benches and lamps and damp trees, and another layered beneath it. A darker twin. Stone arches half buried in earth, faint lights flickering like stars underground, a sense of vast halls and long-forgotten songs. "Don't let go," Kael said gently. "I wasn't planning to," she replied, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. He smiled then, truly smiled, for the first time since she had seen him. A small, quiet, radiant thing that made him look less like a monster and more like a man who had finally found something he'd been searching for far too long. The world tilted. The sound of distant cars faded. The hum of city lights dimmed. For a dizzy second, Elena felt as if she were falling not downward, but inward into a deeper layer of reality. The lamps above them stretched into long streaks of gold, then broke into a sky she didn't recognize, darker, richer, filled with slow-moving constellations she had never seen in any astronomy book. When her feet found solid ground again, she blinked. They were standing in a vast cavern of stone and shadow. Enormous pillars carved with unfamiliar symbols rose into darkness, lit by floating orbs of soft, silver light. Bridges arched over pools of black water that reflected the stars from the not-quite sky above. In the distance, she could see the outlines of towers built into the rock itself, windows shining faintly like the eyes of a sleeping city. It was beautiful, not in the bright, loud way of human cities, but in a quiet, ancient way that made her chest ache. "Welcome," Kael said softly, his hand still holding hers, his voice tinged with something like pride and vulnerability at once. "To Noctera, my realm." Their footsteps echoed as they began to walk forward together, her arm brushing his. It was overwhelming, terrifying, breathtaking. The air here smelled of stone, old books, and something sweet like night-blooming flowers. And beneath it all, she could feel a pulse. A faint thrum, like a heartbeat too large to belong to any creature, coming from the city itself. "Do they know I'm coming?" she asked, her voice hushed despite herself. "No," Kael answered honestly. "But they will feel you. The realm responds to those who enter with open hearts. It's been quiet for a very long time." As if in response, one of the floating lights overhead flared slightly, its glow warming for a moment before settling again. Elena looked up at him. "Are you scared?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. He thought about it. Yes, he said finally. Not of them, of failing you, of asking too much. She squeezed his hand just a little. I'm scared too, she admitted. But I'm also tired of living a small life because other people couldn't see me clearly. He glanced down at her, and the gratitude in his eyes was something she had never imagined seeing directed at her. Then we will be scared together, he said, and brave together, and kind even when it's hard. They reached the edge of a wide balcony carved into the rock. Below them, Noctera stretched out like a dream of night, bridges, towers, glowing veins of light running through the stone. Elena exhaled slowly, the weight of it all resting on her shoulders, and yet somehow, for the first time, not feeling like it would crush her. Far, far above, in the world she had just left, her ex might still be laughing with his friends, certain she would cry herself to sleep and wake up the same. He would never know that the girl he mocked for loving monsters and fairy tales had stepped willingly into a realm of shadow and starlight. He would never know that where he saw too much, a king of the night had seen enough to offer her a throne. Elena turned to Kael, the strongest vampire king, her hand still in his, her heart still beating fast but steady. So, she said with a small, brave smile, what does a queen of monsters do first? Kael's answering smile was slow, almost disbelieving, filled with hope and a hint of humor that made him look astonishingly human. First, he said, she meets them, not as prey, not as rumor, but as someone who sees what they could be, not just what they have been. He paused, his eyes searching hers. And then, together, we teach this world that the greatest strength it has ever known belongs to a girl whose kindness refused to die. Elena looked back out over Noctera, over the hidden world that had chosen her back as surely as she had chosen it. Her past, with all its small pains and quiet humiliations, did not disappear, but it no longer defined her. She had been laughed at for being single. Now she stood at the beginning of a story where she was not an afterthought, not a joke, but the heart of a kingdom. And with the hand of the vampire king in hers and a realm of shadows waiting to be healed, Elena stepped forward into her new life, not as someone too much or not enough, but exactly what she was meant to be.